Come on, John. This is our chance to nail the bastard. I looked at the two impeccably dressed guys sitting on the other side of my desk and wondered if I should just go along with their idea. I wouldn't call either of them my best friends, but we'd worked together in London long enough to be trusted colleagues, and we'd done enough deals to trust each other. I'm not sure, I replied cautiously. What you're suggesting is blatant insider trading, and that's illegal. But what he's doing is damn immoral, John, Michael replied sharply. If he gets away with it, hundreds, no hell thousands, will be hurt, added George, the eldest and usually the most well-meaning of the three of us. Do we know who he's targeting this time? I asked, knowing they had no more ideas than I did but stalling for time. My question didn't even elicit a response. Just one of them shrugged, and the other sighed. I watched them through the huge plate glass window, not for the first time seeing the spectacular view from the window of my penthouse office on the 22nd floor. St. Paul's Cathedral, the impressive curved Cornishian building, and the Thames itself were all in front of me. A view like that usually made me realize how lucky I was, but not on that day, not at that moment. Does the minister know? I asked. Of course he knows, John, replied George, who had the best connections in the current government. I dare say the Prime Minister himself already knows too, but we all knew they couldn't help us if anything went wrong. That's the way it is in the city of London, the financial capital of the free world. I wouldn't want to end up in front of any court any more than you two, I remarked to them. Tell me that when you have your last million left, Michael objected. Because if his damn hedge fund goes after one of us, that's where we'll end up anyway. Tough times indeed. We agreed to consider our positions over the weekend and, at the same time, assess what we had available and how, together, we could handle it. If our combined resources couldn't stand up to his seemingly unlimited wealth and power, no one could. Well, maybe one or two Americans, but we were here and they were there. They had enough problems of their own at that moment. I called my personal assistant, Jenny, to have David call a chauffeur to bring the Bentley up to the driveway and offered to give my two friends a ride. George declined, but Michael agreed. I gave him a ride to the helipad, and soon all three of us were on our way back to our homes for the weekend. It wasn't an easy or relaxing weekend, but even I hadn't realized how hard it would be for me. I was trying to work on my portable Apple computer while David skillfully drove the big limo through late rush-hour traffic. Tom Gentry, bloody Tom Gentry, CEO of the Conal Hedge Fund, the most voracious and insensitive bunch of bastards on this God-given earth. They'd already bought up some good businesses and made a fortune off of it. At least my group of companies made useful products, and two of my friends ran honest banks. But Gentry and his damned Conal produced nothing, helped no one, and just lost huge sums in the stock market and derivatives, making money off other people's misfortune. I personally regretted the day the futures market fell into the hands of vultures like him. I hadn't liked him since the day I first met him, and my thoughts went back to those early days. We'd gone to boarding school together, even shared the same house, though he was a year older than me and rarely missed an opportunity to remind me and my buddies of that. A typical school bully. I hated him the day I met him after he'd rapped me on the ear for no reason, and I'd hated him ever since. But for almost 18 years now, he's had reason to hate me back. Since the day I poached his girlfriend, Melissa, and especially since the day I married her. Almost 18 years of almost uninterrupted happiness for me. And while, like any couple, we had our ups and downs, I wouldn't change much in 18 years. Melissa. Beautiful Melissa. A glamorous top model when I first saw her on the arm of Tom Gentry. I recognized her long golden hair and tall, slender figure from the hundreds of pictures of her that appeared in newspapers and magazines around the world. When she wasn't on the catwalks of Paris, London, New York, or anywhere else, the paparazzi of the day were busy taking pictures of her in the best clubs and in the company of the richest and most famous men in the world. So, who did she choose? Well, the guy whose arm she was seen on these days was also quite rich, and although she still attracted media attention, it was me who was now rich, very rich. I liked being seen with a woman who, despite her wealth and connections, still turned heads wherever she went. She still got the attention of the maitre d' at the best restaurants much faster than I did. Eventually, we rushed through the Kent countryside, and here at last was my home. A wooden mansion that was several hundred years old, depending on which part you looked at, but recently renovated to the highest standards. The door opened as I stepped out of the Bentley, and Katie, our housekeeper, greeted me on the doorstep. "Is Melissa home yet?" I asked and was disappointed to find that she wasn't. "Haven't seen her since Wednesday," the housekeeper remarked somewhat disapprovingly, believing that a wife like Melissa should always be home when I returned for the weekend, since she had to spend most of the week in our downtown apartment. But that's not my wife, who has her own life to think about. She is no longer modeling full-time, but she still does the occasional photo shoot and TV appearance. I've seen it 100 times or more, but I still get a shiver when I look at her in those commercials. The view of her from behind as she walks through the door, naked except for her fancy high-heeled shoes. Me and how many thousands of other guys. I thought she must have the most admired and coveted bare ass in the world. But it's mine and she's mine, and I was more than happy with that. Yes, she has her own life and her own friends, but I don't resent her one bit, as long as she behaves herself. And she has always been there for me. "Disappeared Monday morning, right after you left," Katie continued. "Didn't come back until Wednesday afternoon to change." Oh dear. Katie was in a disapproving mood. I wondered what had gotten into her. "She was with that Julie Cotton," Katie continued. "That horrible woman with the artificial breasts on the TV show." Now I understood why she was in such a mood. Katie didn't approve of actress Julie Cotton at all. "Julie is nothing like her character on TV, Katie," I remarked, trying not to smirk at her simple-mindedness. "That's because you don't hear them talking," she quickly replied. "If you could hear, you wouldn't be so quiet." This time I laughed, but not unkindly, just amused by her simple outlook on life. "Come on, Katie," I demanded softly, trying to be serious. "What dreadful thing have you heard?" Gossip among servants had always been a bit exaggerated, and it hadn't changed much over the years. Nevertheless, what she told me was alarming. No real proof, but alarming all the same. "I've been trying to tell you for months now," she replied with a pained expression on her face. "But you don't listen. You're always too busy. You think the sun shines out of that woman's. But she's running all over you. I'm sure of it. And that Julie Cotton is part of it." Katie didn't know much, of course. Just scraps of conversations and phone calls. But things didn't look good. Not good at all. When I said that Melissa and I had our ups and downs, what I really meant was that a few years ago, I had accused her of hanging around with other guys. She laughed in my face, telling me not to be silly and not to believe what I read in the press. She did live in a different world than I did, but we had accepted it, and things had been fine up until now. Now, however, things were not looking good, really nothing good. Oh, and with all the other things I had to worry about, to make matters worse, she didn't come home that night. No call, no answer from her cell phone when I tried to call. I was very angry, I can tell you. And when George called me in the morning to tell me that they had identified who Cool was targeting, it got even worse. It was me. Not just me personally, of course, but a group of companies I controlled. Conal had information about my investments that they shouldn't have, and we couldn't figure out how they'd managed to find out so much. Although I'd recently fired a manager I'd caught misbehaving, and we decided it had to be him. "What does the minister say, George?" I inquired. But it didn't give much away. "What does Michael think?" "He'll go with me," George replied. "What do you think, George?" "I'll go with you," he ventured. I told him I would call him on Monday and thanked him for his support, confident or almost confident, that together we could defeat Gentry, however illegal our actions might be. Melissa didn't come home that night either, and I was beginning to get really upset. But around mid-morning on Sunday, her Aston Martin DB9 skidded on the road and got covered in gravel. She elegantly stepped out of the sleek sports car, then stood up and unraveled her blonde hair. God, she looked gorgeous, though, as she always did. "Damn it. We need to talk," she said gruffly to me, walking past me like I was a doorman. Damn right. I'd already more or less figured out what I was going to say, and she was about to get the rough end of my tongue. "Where the hell have you been, Melissa?" I demanded. "You've been gone all week." "What I do is my own business, John," Melissa snapped back. "You don't own me and never have." I wasn't going to stand for it. In my mind, if we were married, we both had some responsibility to each other. "Well, If you're going to go back to your old habits, Melissa, I threatened her. We're going to have to rethink our marriage. She turned and looked at me, a smile shining on her beautiful face, the same face that had won over more than 1,000 customers. What marriage? She asked sarcastically. We're done. I'm leaving you for someone else. That knocked the wind out of my sails a little. Probably to one of your stupid actor friends. I threw back at her, more out of anger than reason. If she's dumping me, then so be it. It saves me from having to kick her out. If you think you're going to get any money from me, you have a lot to think about. When we married, she was famous and relatively wealthy. And I, while not a pauper, was not the multimillionaire I had become. It was her lawyer who insisted on a prenup to keep me from getting hold of her money. But by then, she had squandered almost all of hers and was trying to squander mine. But the contract worked both ways, and I wondered if Melissa knew what paltry fortune she'd be walking away with. I won't need your money, John, my soon-to-be ex-wife informed me imperiously. There's plenty of it where I'm going. And besides, you may soon be penniless. How the hell does she know that? Melissa turned away and looked up the road as another car flew into our driveway, obviously following her but unable to keep up with how recklessly she was driving her Aston. A Bugatti. A black Bugatti Veyron. A supercar worth nearly £1 million. And I only knew one person who had one. Hello, John. Tom Gentry grinned, slipping out from behind the wheel. Round 2 is on me, I think, isn't it? How long has it been going on? I muttered pathetically. On and off, declared Bloody Gentry triumphantly. She may have married you, John, but she hasn't stopped sleeping with me. I just stared at him, not knowing what to say. 20 damn years I've been planning and waiting for this moment. He spat at me, following Melissa and packing up his things like it was his own house. You're defeated now, John. More than you realize. I never saw them leave, as by then, I had already returned to my London apartment myself. Later that evening, Michael and George, 2 of my banker friends, and a few other trusted friends gathered at my club. The government minister was there too, but discreetly, not officially, of course. Now I know where he got his information from, I told them. My loving wife told him everything he wanted to know. So, based on what you inferred from your wife's betrayal, John, the minister summarized half an hour later, you can counter Kono's actions without resorting to inside information? I had hoped you would see it that way. I agreed with him, and we all shook hands and retired to the bar. By mid-morning the next day, my company's stock began to plummet after the futures market had mysteriously gambled huge sums on the fact that we wouldn't survive the week. But that didn't last long, as 2 private banks backed my company with funds that were, thankfully, deferred. And then 2 prominent stock columnists told the world that there was no problem. The slide hesitated, then slid again, as still huge sums of money were put on the line. Within hours, everything was on the line, and the phones were red hot as trades and countertrades were made. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the television announced that the government was announcing my company as the preferred bidder for a huge contract to supply services to the National Health Service. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe not. It's convenient to have friends in high places, especially when what they do is so honest. Never mind that the contract was never signed. It only instilled confidence in the market, and the foray into our stock price quickly waned. Kono lost a huge fortune, and in turn the market turned against him. They never actually went bankrupt, but Tom Gentry's reputation was ruined, and he was forced off the board 2 months later. Only a few people mourned his passing, and as far as I know, no one undertook to help him in his time of need. He didn't lose everything, but when, less than a month later, his Bugatti crashed into a highway bridge on a long straight stretch of road at 170 miles an hour, it was said that he had his last million left. Poor guy. Too bad. That Bugatti was a beautiful car. Melissa crawled back. Well, of course she did. But I didn't kick her out right away. When she called me at my apartment in the city, she was all love and apologies. She'd probably found out from her lawyer what she was facing for our breakup. Hi, honey, she cooed sexily. I made a terrible mistake. But it's not my fault, honey. Oh no, I asked. The fact that you left me for my worst enemy is not your fault, you say? No, sweetie, honestly, honey, he made me do it, stated Melissa. And what did he do then? I continued. Tied your hands behind your back with your own panties and made you have sex with him? There was silence on the other end of the line, and I wondered how close my flippant remark was to what may have actually happened. It was quite possible that it had, because she changed the subject. Listen, honey, Melissa finally continued. I admit that I went to bed with him willingly, but I didn't want it to break us up. I still love you, and you are my one and only lover. Damn. Gentry told me he's been using you since we were married. Melissa. I reminded her. He was exaggerating a bit, she whimpered back. Fairness, rather boldly throwing caution to the wind. For heaven's sake, John, she said with more confidence. You know I was never too faithful to you during our marriage. In the circles I've always revolved around, the attitude toward casual sex was different than yours. This admission came as news to me, though, truth be told, it wasn't much of a surprise. I didn't say anything and just let her continue. Sex is sex. So what? I slept with guys when I was a teenager because they gave me a job when I first started working, and I've been doing it for fun ever since. But John, I've always loved only you, my sweetie. You've always been the one for me. She was indeed very convincing, and besides being a top model, she also did a bit of acting. If it hadn't been for Gentry, well, I was no saint myself. What was I supposed to do? On the one hand, I think she did have some feelings for me. Although, now that Gentry is gone, my wealth may have influenced that. I think I still loved her in my own way. She was great in bed, just fantastic. And although she couldn't cook to save her life, it didn't matter in my position. She was also exceptionally beautiful, and that wasn't just my preconceived notion. Just a couple of years ago, she'd been voted one of the 10 most beautiful women in the world by that stupid celebrity magazine she and her friends read. It never hurt me to show up at any reception with Melissa on my arm, and there weren't many guys she couldn't get around. But Gentry, even dead, still haunted me just like before. I'll be back in Kent on Friday night, I told her. Be there, and we'll talk about it. I actually got home a little earlier than usual, as I had a few things to take care of before Melissa arrived. When she showed up in the Aston Martin and leaned back sexily in the seat, I realized that she had been particularly careful about her appearance. The short, tight-fitting dress she wore couldn't be bought at any store on the street, and the name Versace came to mind, but I couldn't be sure. It was impossible not to admire her. Hi, honey, Melissa breathed hoarsely, kissing me warmly on the cheek. I ushered her inside and led her into the parlor, where I enclosed her in my arms. Her soft body pressed against mine, and I felt her firm, natural breasts against my chest. Damn, she was nice to the touch, and I realized how much I'd missed her body since she'd left. Oh, John, she whispered sexily. It's been a while since we've used the pool table like this. I pushed open the door and stepped aside to let her through. What the hell? Oh my God, she said, surprised as she entered the room and saw the surprise I had in store for her. You want me to take you back? Then you'll have to pay, Melissa dear. I whispered into her delicate ear, encouraging her to come into the room. A group of good friends had gathered, Michael and George, of course, and 5 others who had helped me in my time of need. It was a time of reckoning, and not just in one sense. They were all basking in the beauty of Melissa, who stood before them in a bra, panties, high heels, and the longest earrings imaginable. You could hear a pin drop as Melissa stood there, wondering what was going on, while the guys looked on, drooling at the half-dressed vision before them. So, I'll be entertaining you this evening? Melissa asked, looking back at me over her shoulder, more than a hint of a smile appearing on her pretty face. That's up to you, sweetie, I replied, smiling back at her. Did you say you'd pay, John? She muttered, taking a cautious step forward. That's the kind of punishment I could be subjected to every day. With those words, she stepped away from me and walked into the middle of the room with that gait characteristic only of models. Michael, she whispered aloud to my friend, maybe you want to start and take off my bra? Michael didn't need a second invitation. He walked up behind her, undid the clasp, and slowly removed the flimsy garment from her shoulders, his hands fleetingly touching Melissa's breasts. Well done, Michael, My wife smiled as she looked at the others. Could have been funny, but no one laughed. It was one of the most erotic things I'd ever witnessed as George, quite skillfully as it turned out, slowly lowered first one side, then the other. By then, Melissa was in complete control of the situation. Some of the most powerful men in the country were eating out of her hands. "Who's first?" she asked, looking around at the smirking faces surrounding her. "Is that you, Normie baby, hiding over there in the corner?" she demanded, looking at the government minister lurking in the shadows. He was hesitant to come because of his position but couldn't resist when I told him what was on the menu. He blushed visibly and was about to stand up, but Melissa only waved him back. "Normie baby, huh? Sir Norman Street, John Minister of the Crown and Member of Parliament for East Chelsea. Would take some time to come to terms with that. And not you, Arthur, my dear." She turned to the world-famous newspaper magnate seated to her left. "You didn't leave me as satisfied as usual last time, so you can go last." This was news to me too, and he threw me a confused look. I guess it didn't really matter much by then. "You there? What's your name?" she asked, probably the only male stranger in the room. "Cedric," he mumbled and grinned like a schoolboy, boldly. She grabbed his tie and dragged him grudgingly to his feet. Melissa positioned herself on the pool table, and the fun began. My gardener, Fred, did his part too but disappeared rather quickly, as his wife, Kathy, my housekeeper, was due back later. Someone had to clean up the mess on our pool table, didn't they? I clocked in at 5 hours and 35 minutes, give or take a little. By then, all the men were tired and fed up, or Melissa would have kept going. Damn her. She was enjoying the hell out of it like a cow. It didn't matter because I didn't keep my word and threw her out on the street the next day. Katie took great pleasure in packing her suitcases, and they were ready when she came down for breakfast. As we loaded them into the Bentley, Melissa begged me again to take her back. "No way, honey," I told her. "No goddamn way." She was beyond furious as she reluctantly climbed into the car after David, carefully hiding the keys to her Aston. "It won't take long to replace you," Melissa spat as she pulled away. "Drop me off in Mayfair, David. I have friends who will be happy to see me there." Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. But since David had been instructed to drop her off at the local bus stop in the village, it would be more than an hour and more than one bus change, in those ridiculously high heels and carrying heavy suitcases, before she knew it. I knew it wouldn't take her long to find another sucker to fund her lifestyle, but the rumor of her betrayal and group indulgence had leaked out. I wonder how she never became an A-list person. Even her commercials were eventually taken off the air as she lost her celebrity status. Never mind, though. I still have a copy of this movie on DVD.